What does Star Wars say about the Force without George Lucas still around to call the shots? A new Star Wars show called The Acolyte is about to challenge Lucas's long-standing views of what it means to have a balance between the light and the dark side. This is Geeky Stoics, and we'll explain why this matters. Acolyte showrunner Leslye Headland just said in an interview about the new series, "The way I look at it is, there is no light without darkness, no good without bad. So to me, and this might just be a personal thing, the Force is about balance. It's not just a Marvel superpower. The Force-sensitive aren't using telekinesis because they're special, powerful people. It's because they've achieved balance. As Yoda says, my ally is the Force." So the idea of a separation from that was really interesting. If you are unbalanced, the Force cannot protect you. There's a lot here to unpack, but I'll start by saying that this is all about origins. Is Star Wars a dualism story or a corruption story? There is no light without darkness, no good without bad. Star Wars is many of the world's philosophies thrown into a blender, spun around. Eastern and Western thought both share space in the rhetoric of Yoda and Qui-Gon Jinn, but not all philosophies are represented positively in Star Wars. So let's start with this. A Christian would acknowledge that first there was darkness and God spoke into existence the light, the creation story. Like Headland was saying, there is no light at the end of the tunnel unless there's a tunnel. You can't have hope unless you know what despair is. But in moral terms, things are precisely the other way around. Darkness cannot exist without light. Evils require goods that are corrupted. The presence of darkness and evil requires first a good thing that can be turned rotten. Theologically, Satan isn't just a devil, he's a fallen angel. Big difference. Goods turned bad. Love to jealousy. Courage twisted to impulsiveness. Confidence warped into pride. George Lucas was raised Methodist after all, and while he's not a believer, he was paying attention. Christian thinkers ranging from St. Augustine to Aquinas to C.S. Lewis in the 20th century have all gone really deep on this idea, and while George Lucas is well known for his affection for Eastern mythology and philosophy, as is seen in much of Star Wars, he borrows from everywhere, and balance within the Force seems to be where he looked more westward. For the C.S. Lewis example, he's talked about dualism, and he said that if it is true, then the bad power must be a being who likes badness for its own sake, but we have no experience of anyone who likes badness just because it is bad. The nearest we can get is cruelty. Now, Star Wars has somebody for this, Palpatine. Palpatine is the big bad of Star Wars, and even he doesn't perpetuate badness for its own sake. He justifies it with good things.
We shall have peace.
Peace, security, prosperity. He tortures, he kills, he takes pleasure in people's pain, but it's always for a purpose, which is gaining power by which he can rule the galaxy more firmly and provide the false promises of peace and security to the people. He's not just doing it for fun, necessarily. That darkness is the imbalance, and light is itself the balance. For George Lucas's Star Wars, what Headland said about the Force would make no sense. From the original trilogy to the prequels to the Clone Wars era, Lucas had a very narrow mindset about balance, which is not the sort of yin-yang dualism view of light and darkness that Headland was alluding to. Lucas was always talking about selfishness when it came to the dark side. People who are takers and want more. In the writer's room for the Clone Wars, seated next to a doodling Dave Filoni, Lucas reiterates,
You got the dark side, the light side. One is selfless, one is selfish, and you want to keep them in balance. What happens when you go to the dark side is it goes out of balance, and then you get really selfish and you forget about everybody, and you ultimately lead yourself, because when you get selfish, you get stuff, or you want stuff. And when you want stuff and you get stuff, then you are afraid somebody's going to take it away from you, whether it's a person or a thing or a particular pleasure. Once you become afraid that somebody's going to take it away from you or you're going to lose it, and that anger leads to hate. and hate leads to suffering.
George Lucas 101, meaning the dark side is not a thing that you can contain. It is hunger. It is the urge for more. The dark side necessitates imbalance. Headland represents a larger view of the Force, a postmodern view that says you can have it all and should have it. She's the extension of the if it feels good, then do it crowd, who wants a new Star Wars morality that doesn't poo-poo on emotion or finger wag at anger.
It is only natural. He cut off your arm, and you wanted revenge.
This view believes in earnest that you can have the anger, especially righteous anger, without slipping into the hate and then the suffering. Instead, you're empowered. It's not my goal to be political in this video, but that's an obvious undercurrent here. Different philosophies about what sets us free as people. The people who advocate for restraint, discipline, and abstention from certain things as a means of being free, versus people who think that experiencing all things, indulging your wants, and feeling good is the definition of life. This is timeless. That's what the Sith and the Jedi are really warring about. It's Roman Stoicism versus Epicureanism 2.0. We did a whole video on this, which you should check out, by the way. How can we avoid suffering in this life? The Darksider consumes and gains power over the things they fear or hate. They crush potential sources of suffering and see the passions as something that they can master. The Lightsider, or the Jedi, they avoid suffering by acknowledging the power of passions. They think passions will get the best of them eventually, and so they stay hands-off. They don't want to touch it. What I worry about with this Acolyte series and Leslye Headland's view of the Force is that it starts with a backward premise compared to George Lucas. There is no light without darkness. Or is it that there's no darkness without light? This changes everything about the way that you'll see morality and the Force. Star Wars hinges on this. This isn't Headland's fault or ill will. Fair minds can disagree and theorize about the Force. Star Wars under Disney has been toying with this a lot, ranging from Luke Skywalker's teachings on Ahch-To about powerful light and powerful dark, death, decay, and the balance, and then there's Anakin himself in The World Between Worlds, Dave Filoni's Ahsoka show. The apparition of Anakin Skywalker is a walking yin-yang, Vader and Skywalker in one, a sort of dualistic god, perhaps the new father of the Mortis gods, which is part light and part dark. But at the end of the day, I think characters, like all of us in the audience, are learning and unlearning and rethinking the Force all the time. Just because Luke said powerful light requires powerful dark, it doesn't mean that he's correct. It just means that it's what he thinks at the time about the Force, and the director. We can disagree about it, and as we know of Luke in The Last Jedi, he's not exactly in the most positive headspace. You can take things that he says with a grain of salt. What do you think about the light, the dark, and the balance? Can they coexist in Star Wars' ever-morphing mythology, or is it the case that the dark side is what makes balance impossible? Thanks for watching Geeky Stoics. We do Star Wars philosophy and get into the wisdom of pop culture. Subscribe to the channel and join our free community over at geekystoics.com and live better, mythically.
Our favorite stories shape the way we see the world, and that's what Geeky Stoics is all about.
Chewie, we're home.
And that's what Stephen and I have really believed for the longest time, and we've been really excited about as we've gotten Geeky Stoics off the ground.